What happens when a legendary British pop icon sits down for what should be a routine interview, only to find himself in the crosshairs of one of television's most controversial hosts? The tension was palpable from the moment Sir Cliff Richard walked onto the View set, but nobody could have predicted the explosive confrontation that would unfold between him and Joy Behar. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think about celebrity interviews gone wrong. The morning started like any other at the View Studios in New York. Sir Cliff Richard, the legendary British singer with over 60 years in the music industry, was scheduled for a pleasant chat about his upcoming tour and recent memoir. At 73 years old, Cliff had weathered countless interviews, from hostile journalists to overeager fans, and he approached this appearance with his usual charm and professionalism. As the cameras rolled and the show's iconic theme music faded, Whoopi Goldberg introduced their distinguished guest with genuine warmth. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the one and only Sir Cliff Richard. The audience erupted in applause as Cliff walked out, waving and smiling, his silver hair perfectly styled and his navy suit impeccable. "Thank you so much for having me," Cliff said, settling into his chair with the practiced ease of someone who had done this thousands of times before. "It's wonderful to be here in New York." Whoopi beamed at him. "We're thrilled to have you, Sir Cliff. Your memoir, The Dreamer, has been climbing the bestseller lists. Tell us what inspired you to finally tell your story." Cliff leaned forward slightly, his eyes lighting up. "Well, Whoopi, after 6 decades in this business, I realized I had stories that needed telling. Not just about the music, but about the journey, the friendships, the challenges we all face in life." Sarah Haynes nodded approvingly. "The book is incredibly honest about your faith journey and how it sustained you through difficult times. That must have been vulnerable to share." "It was," Cliff admitted, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "But I believe authenticity resonates with people. My faith has been my anchor through everything, the good times and the storms." The conversation was flowing beautifully when Joy Behar, who had been unusually quiet up to this point, suddenly leaned forward with a sharp smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Speaking of storms, Cliff, you've certainly had your share of controversies over the years, haven't you?" The temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees. Cliff's smile remained, but there was a slight tightening around his eyes. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, Joy." "Oh, come on," Joy said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "The investigations, the allegations. Don't you think it's a bit convenient that you're promoting a book about redemption right after all that mess?" Whoopi shot Joy a warning look, but Joy was just getting started. The other hosts shifted uncomfortably in their seats as Cliff's demeanor began to change from warm guest to a man preparing to defend himself. "Joy," Cliff said, his voice still controlled but with a steel edge creeping in, "I think you're conflating very different situations. The matter you're alluding to was thoroughly investigated and completely resolved. I was completely exonerated." Joy scoffed. "Exonerated is a strong word. Just because charges weren't filed doesn't mean—" "It means exactly that," Cliff interrupted, his British politeness beginning to crack. "It means I was innocent of any wrongdoing, which I always was and always will be." The studio audience was dead silent now, sensing the shift in energy. What had started as a promotional interview was rapidly transforming into something much more uncomfortable. Joy wasn't backing down. In fact, she seemed to be warming up. "But surely you understand why people might be skeptical. I mean, these types of allegations don't just come out of nowhere." Sonny Hostin tried to jump in. "Joy, maybe we should focus on—" No, Joy said, cutting her off with a sharp gesture. "This is exactly what we should be talking about. Accountability, transparency, not just feel-good stories about faith and redemption." Cliff's jaw tightened visibly. "Accountability for what, exactly? For being falsely accused? For having my reputation dragged through the mud by people who don't care about facts?" "Oh, here we go," Joy said, rolling her eyes dramatically. "The victim narrative. It's always the same with you guys." "You guys?" Cliff repeated, his voice rising slightly. "What exactly do you mean by that?" The tension was becoming unbearable. Whoopi was trying to signal to the producers, while the other hosts looked like they wanted to disappear into their chairs. But Joy Behar was in her element now, leaning back in her chair with the satisfied expression of someone who had successfully cornered their prey. Privileged men who think they can just sweep their past under the rug with a nice book tour and some crocodile tears about faith, Joy said, her voice dripping with disdain. That was the moment everything changed. Cliff Richard, the consummate professional who had maintained his composure through decades of interviews, finally reached his breaking point. His face flushed red, and when he spoke, his voice carried a quiet fury that was somehow more intimidating than shouting would have been. "How dare you?" he said, each word precisely enunciated. "How dare you sit there and make accusations against a man you don't know, about situations you clearly haven't bothered to research properly?" Joy's eyes widened slightly at the venom in Cliff's voice, but she quickly recovered, clearly relishing the fight she had started. "Oh, I've done my research, Sir Cliff. And what I found was a pattern of using your celebrity status and charitable work as a shield." "A shield?" Cliff's voice was incredulous now, his carefully maintained composure completely shattered. "My charitable work spans 5 decades. I've raised millions for children's causes, disaster relief, and countless other organizations. Are you seriously suggesting that helping others is some kind of smokescreen?" "I'm suggesting," Joy said, leaning forward with predatory intensity, "that people in positions of power often use good deeds to cover up bad behavior. It's the oldest playbook in the book." Alyssa Farah Griffin finally found her voice. "Joy, I think we need to be careful about making these kinds of implications without..." "Without what?" Joy snapped, turning her attention to her co-host. "Without holding powerful men accountable? This is exactly the problem with society today. We're so quick to forgive and forget just because someone writes a book about finding God." Cliff stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that echoed through the silent studio. "I will not sit here and be lectured about accountability by someone who clearly has no interest in facts or fairness." "Sit down, Sir Cliff," Joy said mockingly, emphasizing his title with obvious sarcasm. "You came on this show to sell your book, so let's talk about what's really in it. All this talk about redemption and forgiveness, but what about taking responsibility?" "Responsibility for what?" Cliff's voice was louder now, his British accent thickening with emotion. "For being the victim of a malicious accusation that was thoroughly investigated and found to be baseless? For having my home raided on live television while I was thousands of miles away, completely unaware? For having my name dragged through every tabloid in the country?" Joy waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, please. The persecution complex is strong with this one." That comment seemed to break something fundamental in Cliff Richard. His face went from red to pale, and when he spoke, his voice was shaking with barely controlled rage. "Persecution complex? Do you have any idea what it's like to have your entire life's work questioned because of lies? To have people you've never met decide you're guilty based on gossip and innuendo? Welcome to the real world," Joy shot back, "where actions have consequences and celebrity doesn't make you untouchable." "What actions?" Cliff exploded, his voice echoing through the studio. "What consequences? I was investigated by the police for 2 years. 2 years of my life destroyed while they turned over every stone, interviewed every person I'd ever worked with, examined every aspect of my career. And do you know what they found? Nothing. Absolutely nothing, because there was nothing to find." Whoopi was frantically gesturing to someone off camera, clearly trying to get the segment wrapped up, but Joy was far from finished. She seemed energized by Cliff's emotional response. "The police investigation isn't the only measure of truth," she said coldly. "Sometimes the system protects the powerful. Sometimes justice isn't served in a courtroom." "Justice?" Cliff repeated, his voice cracking with emotion. "You want to talk about justice? Where was the justice when my accuser was allowed to remain anonymous while my name was splashed across every headline? Where was the justice when the media convicted me before any investigation even began? Where was the justice when people like you decided I was guilty simply because I was accused?" Joy shrugged with calculated indifference. "If you have nothing to hide, then why are you so defensive?" The question hung in the air like a poison cloud. It was the ultimate catch-22, the kind of loaded question that made any response seem incriminating. Cliff stared at Joy for a long moment, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. "Defensive?" he said quietly, and there was something dangerous in his tone now. "You ambushed me on live television with false accusations and character assassination, and you call my response defensive?" "I call it suspicious," Joy replied with a smirk. Innocent people don't usually react this way to simple questions. Simple questions? Cliff's voice was climbing again. You've spent the last 10 minutes implying that I'm a criminal who uses charity work to cover up misconduct. You've suggested that my faith is fake, that my book is a lie, and that I somehow escape justice through privilege and power. And you call that simple questions? Sarah Haynes tried once more to redirect. Maybe we could talk about your upcoming tour. No, Cliff said firmly, his eyes never leaving Joy's face. We're going to finish this conversation because this is exactly what's wrong with modern media. People like her, he pointed directly at Joy, think they can destroy someone's reputation based on nothing more than their own prejudices and assumptions. Joy laughed, actually laughed, and the sound was sharp and mocking. Oh, this is rich. Now I'm the villain because I asked some tough questions. This is why victims don't come forward, because powerful men like you turn everything around and make themselves the victims. Victims? Cliff's voice was barely controlled now. You want to know about victims? I'll tell you about victims. Victims are the children I've spent my entire career trying to help through my charitable work. Victims are the fans who've been confused and hurt by malicious lies spread about someone they admired. Victims are the innocent people who have their lives destroyed by false accusations, while people like you cheer from the sidelines. The studio was completely silent except for Cliff's heavy breathing and the distant sound of cameras continuing to roll. Joy sat back in her chair, a satisfied smile playing on her lips as if she had accomplished exactly what she set out to do. Are you finished with your little tantrum? She asked coolly. That was the final straw. Cliff Richard, who had maintained his dignity through 6 decades of public life, who had weathered scandals and setbacks with grace, finally reached the point of no return. His face went white with fury, and when he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. Tantrum? He whispered. You think this is a tantrum? This is what happens when a decent person finally stands up to a bully. Joy's confident smirk faltered slightly at the word bully, but she quickly regained her composure. Bully? I'm a journalist asking legitimate questions. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. Journalist? Cliff let out a bitter laugh that echoed through the studio. Is that what you call yourself? A journalist? Because real journalists deal in facts, not character assassination. Real journalists do research instead of relying on gossip and innuendo. I've done my research, Joy insisted, but there was a defensive edge to her voice now. I know about the allegations, the investigation, the settlement. Settlement? Cliff's voice rose to a near shout. What settlement? There was no settlement because there was no case. You're literally making things up on live television. Joy's face flushed red as she realized her mistake. She had clearly confused details from different cases or different people entirely. The other hosts were staring at her in horror, realizing that she had just made a potentially libelous statement on national television. I meant the legal costs, Joy said quickly, trying to backtrack. The money spent on lawyers and... Stop, Cliff said, holding up his hand. Just stop. You've proven my point perfectly. You don't know what you're talking about. You've confused me with someone else, or you've mixed up completely different situations, and you're sitting here destroying my reputation based on information you can't even get right. Whoopi finally found her voice. Cliff, I think there might be some confusion here. Joy, maybe we should. There's no confusion, Cliff said, his voice now cold and controlled. She came into this interview with an agenda. She wanted to take down a guest for her own entertainment, and she didn't bother to check her facts first. This isn't journalism, it's a hit job. Joy's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. For the first time in the entire confrontation, she seemed truly rattled. I never said you were guilty of anything. I was just asking questions. Just asking questions? Cliff repeated incredulously. You accused me of using charity work as a smokescreen. You suggested I escape justice through privilege. You implied I was part of some pattern of powerful men avoiding accountability. And now you're going to sit there and pretend you were just asking innocent questions? The production team was clearly in crisis mode. Cameras were still rolling, but there was frantic activity behind the scenes as producers tried to figure out how to handle the situation. The audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing what was clearly the most explosive moment in The View's recent history. Sunny Hostin attempted to mediate. I think we can all agree that emotions are running high here. Maybe we should take a breath and... No, Cliff interrupted, his gaze still fixed on Joy. I want her to answer my question. Do you believe the police investigation was thorough? Do you believe that if there had been any evidence of wrongdoing, charges would have been filed? Joy shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I believe the system isn't always perfect. That's not what I asked, Cliff pressed. I asked if you believe the investigation was thorough, yes or no. I don't know all the details of the investigation, Joy admitted reluctantly. You don't know the details, Cliff repeated slowly, but you felt qualified to question the results on national television. You don't know the facts, but you were ready to destroy someone's reputation. Do you see the problem here? Joy's face was now bright red, and her usual quick wit seemed to have abandoned her completely. I was trying to have a discussion about accountability in the entertainment industry. By using me as your example without bothering to learn the actual facts of my case, Cliff shot back. That's not a discussion, Joy. That's a lynching. The word lynching hung in the air like a bombshell. Several people in the studio audibly gasped. Joy's face went from red to pale, clearly realizing that the situation had spiraled completely out of her control. That's a very strong word, she said weakly. It's the right word, Cliff replied firmly. When you destroy someone's reputation based on lies and misinformation, what else